Welcome back to Flip the Tables. This episode, we will be discussing humor in leadership and how it connects perfectly with love leadership through research, scripture, and experience. And on this episode, we'll be welcoming our first guest, Dr. John Reams. But before our interview, let's dive into this episode's research. Starting with the hard truth, some leaders are allergic to humor. They think seriousness equals credibility. They think laughter undermines authority and shows immaturity. Neutral faces and measured tones only, and absolutely no laughter above 3 out of 10. Which is fascinating considering that most secure leaders in history didn't have that type of tension to prove that they were in charge. Research backs this up. Dr. Jennifer Akers' work at Stanford shows humor increases influence and memorability. Harvard Business Review has reported that leaders who use positive humor increase engagement and team performance. I can attest to this. My team loves a good laugh, and they are so successful. Humor doesn't weaken leadership. It reveals it. Research in organizational psychology consistently has shown that leaders who appropriately use humor are perceived as more trustworthy, more competent, and guess what? More human. Translation: people listen better when they don't feel like they're being managed by a robot. Now, Kim Cameron's work on positive leadership demonstrates that positive emotional climates, including humor, improve performance, resilience, and engagement. That doesn't mean jokes for the sake of jokes. It means love that creates space to breathe. Proverbs 17:22 reads, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones." If your leadership style constantly dries people out, humor isn't your problem, but love might be. Addressing the question you probably have been asking yourself since I started this episode. Yes, I'm still going to be connecting love leadership with being the most aligned with Jesus, even in the midst of discussing humor. See, some imagine Jesus as being permanently serious, mildly disappointed, and allergic to wit. That version of Jesus could have never sustained followers. Jesus used exaggeration. He used irony. Jesus used imagery so absurd that people remembered it forever. I mean, come on, camels through needles, planks and eyes. That's humor with purpose. And we will touch back on a few specific biblical stories here in a bit. Now, Matthew 7:3 reads, "Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the beam of wood in your own eye?" That's not just teaching. That's a comedy contrast designed to disarm defensiveness. Love knows how to confront without crushing. Humor rooted in love builds. Humor rooted in ego humiliates. Research on leadership communication warns that humor used to shame, belittle, or signal superiority erodes trust faster than silence ever could. That kind of humor isn't clever, it's lazy. And that kind of humor gives actual humor a bad rap. Jesus never used humor to punch down. He used it to expose power, hypocrisy, and self-importance. Matthew 23:11 reads, "The greatest among you will be your servant." If your humor only works when you're above someone, you're not utilizing it in your leadership. You're just performing. Humor can build trust. Amy Edmondson's research on psychological safety shows that people perform better when they feel safe to speak, fail, and try again. Humor, when used well, creates that safety. It signals that you're not untouchable. You don't need to be dominant in the room, and you're confident enough to be human. Patrick Lachoni says trust is the foundation of every healthy team. Brene Brown's research shows vulnerability builds connection. Leaders who laugh at themselves lower barriers. Dave Ulrich emphasizes relational credibility as essential to long-term influence. None of these researchers have said to maintain authority by being emotionally unavailable is the way. That is not a strong strategy. That's big signs of being insecure. Rod A. Martin, an organizational psychologist, said humor can function as a social bonding mechanism, enhancing interpersonal relationships and reducing tensions within groups. Sarcastic note here. Leaders who think humor makes them lose control usually has already lost trust. They just didn't notice. Brother Paul reminds us again in 1 Corinthians 13:4 that love is patient. Love is kind and is not arrogant. Arrogance can't laugh at itself, but love sure can. And while we're here, let's address the difference between sarcasm and humor. Sarcasm can be powerful. Used well, it exposes ego. Used poorly, it creates wounds. I always open a new friendship, interview, anything like that by sliding in that I'm quite sarcastic. I mean, okay, a lot sarcastic. And if that's not your thing, please let me know and I will try to hold it to a minimum, just out of respect for them. Throughout the scripture, you find sarcastic hits Jesus typically aimed at prideful people. Calling religious leaders whitewashed tombs, that's not gentle. It was aimed at hypocrisy. Sarcasm often carries a more aggressive approach with an ambiguous tone. Some call it a double-edged communication form due to being misinterpreted at times and requiring explanation. Hung, Gino, and Galinsky said that within their research, sarcasm involves one saying the opposite of what they actually mean, while carrying a critical or contemptuous tone. Their research found that sarcasm can stimulate abstract thinking and creativity. However, only in environments where strong trust already exists. In my professional opinion, being one that uses sarcasm quite regularly, until you have reached a certain level of trust within your team and those you're routinely working with, I would hold off on the sarcasm for a bit. And if you are using sarcasm to humiliate the weakest person in the room, don't try wrapping that up as wit. You're being a coward. It's clear that there's a fine line to walk when you're using humor and sarcasm within your leadership. A good question to address is, why are bad leaders afraid of humor? Humor threatens leaders who rely on intimidation, mystique, and unchallengeable authority. In those atmospheres, humor leaves the room. Jim Collins' research on Level 5 leadership found that the most effective leaders combine humility with resolve. Many of them deflect praise, laugh easily, and don't take themselves too seriously. Funny how love and humility keep showing up together. Listen, if your authority depends on silence, it's unstable. Secure leaders laugh. Insecure leaders monitor the volume in the room. Here's what is beautiful. Humor builds relational equity. Relational equity makes accountability land a whole lot softer. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A cheerful heart is good medicine." Medicine heals, not avoids. As leaders, we don't have to be flamboyant, careless, or rigid. Love leadership is all about having warmth, and warmth often sounds like joy. Joy is not a distraction from leadership. It's the fuel for endurance. Now, before we welcome Dr. Reams to the show, I wanted to mention a couple of my favorite humorous stories from the Bible. First being Elijah. In 1 Kings 18, when he is challenging over 400 prophets for crying out to their God all morning, yet nothing is happening, he essentially said to them, maybe your God is asleep, or busy, or on a trip. And that, to me, that's ancient sarcasm, and it's hilarious. He doesn't attack their humanity. He exposes their absurdity. There's a clear difference. The second one is Balaam and the talking donkey in Numbers 22. A donkey sees an angel. The prophet does not. The donkey speaks. Balaam argues. Imagine being so spiritually dull that your donkey has more discernment than you, and then you debate it. If that is not a major ironic humor, what is? Scripture is not stiff. It's layered, sharp, and memorable. Back to leadership. Leadership doesn't have to be joyless to be serious. It doesn't need to be rigid to be respected. Love creates room for laughter, and laughter creates room for trust, and trust is where leadership works. If your leadership could use less tension and more truth, less fear and more humanity, less performance and more presence, you're not losing authority, you're starting to lead like Jesus, through love. Now, when we return, we will welcome Dr. John Reams. He is one of those leaders I mentioned in my first episode that entered my life at the right time and started lifting those weights off my shoulders, pushing me to be the leader that I am today. And he did it with, you guessed it, humor, among a few other things. From our first conversation to our everyday banner, Dr. Reams has the personality to bring comfort to almost any atmosphere. He's genuine, he's kind, and he's a leader that truly has a heart filled with love. I never imagined that I would go from working for him as the university registrar to being his counterpart on the other end of the hall. However, The relationship that was built previously is showing fruit through the collaboration and successful growth that we are experiencing today in our professional roles. All of that makes him the perfect guest for this episode. Welcome back and welcome, Dr. Reams. I'm excited to have you on Flip the Tables podcast, and congratulations, or maybe not, depending on how this first one goes. So welcome.
Thank you.
So first question, what did you think about when I asked you to join this particular episode of the podcast?
Well, I've always been told that I have an excellent face for radio, so I figured I was well suited for that. And the other thing was that when you asked me to talk about humor, to be honest, I was initially disappointed because I don't see humor as being a great strength of mine. I mean, it's part of who I am, but there are probably other things I would be more excited to talk about. But this is your podcast and you get to choose.
Well, I disagree. I think humor is one of your best. So let's get into the educational discussions. Hopefully we won't bore people. But when you hear humor and leadership, what is the difference between humor that builds trust and humor that undermines it?
Good question. Well, two things. First, if my humor is at the expense of others, right? And I think we all learned that at a young age, that it's probably not a good thing to make fun of others. Now, I tease you relentlessly, right? And that's because to you, that's kind of your language. You enjoy that. There are other people that I would not tease relentlessly because I knew it would hurt their feelings. So if I did it knowing it would hurt their feelings and upset them, then I'm not being funny, I'm being mean, right? And there's a big difference. The second thought is that, the Bible talks about us staying away from just foolish talk, right? And foolish talk in that concept is any speech that rather than building up or rather than encouraging, or rather than making comfortable, you're actually doing it to break down. You're doing it to break somebody down, whether it's the person that you're talking to, or whether you're breaking down somebody else, right? So those are just two quick examples of bad humor, of an inappropriate use of humor.
Yeah. So you'd say that there's just a fine line of getting to know your people before you break into that humor realm.
Yes. There are things that I could say to you that I could not say to other people, right? And vice versa.
Right. Because we've built our relationship off of humor because we both that's our love language.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. That's exactly right. That's part of who we are.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not trying to be somebody I'm not. And
exactly.
You're not trying to be somebody you're not. And that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is, can you share a moment when humor helped you navigate a tense or difficult situation as a leader?
I don't want to answer that question specifically as you asked it.
Okay.
Because seriously, as you're asking it, the first thing that comes to mind is back when I was really young. All right. So I was not a leader. I was a young kid, probably maybe 7, 8 years old. I was in Greensboro, North Carolina, visiting my grandparents. I was in a house that was built in the 1920s, and I'm sitting there at the table, at the kitchen table, with with her, my mom, my dad, my older brother, and my uncle. I loved my uncle dearly. He was funny. He was a loving, he still is, genuinely funny guy. All right. And not in a clownish way, he's just fun to be around. We were sitting at the table in the midst of a really bad storm. And suddenly the television comes on with an alert that there's a tornado warning. And the weather outside's terrible. And my dad goes out and sees that he actually sees the tornado when he comes back in. And this is an old house. There's really no good, safe place to go. And so we're just sitting at the table and we're scared to death. My poor brother is this ghost white. And then the power goes out. That's not a good sign. The power goes out, and the newsman that was on the television warning us of impending death, of course, he disappears. And then my uncle, I don't even remember what it was, but my uncle in that moment said something that was so funny in response to the newsman who was actually worth making fun of. when he disappeared off the screen when the power went out, he said something that immediately got everybody at the table laughing, and it just took away the fear, even just for a few moments. It just completely took away that fear. And then shortly thereafter, the tornado moved on and we were fine. But I never forgot that. I never forgot how one of the scariest moments of my young life immediately got turned into a memorable moment because of a man that kind of spoke up and said something funny for the purpose of his family at the table.
Yeah, that's a great story. Okay. How does a leader's position of power change how their humor is received?
Well, very similar to the way anything else has changed once you're in a position of power or responsibility. Is that when you say something in a position of leadership, it's more likely that the people around you are just going to smile and nod, right? I mean, let's be honest, right? We've all done that.
Yep.
If I tell a joke that's inappropriate, I hope that somebody would speak up and call me out on it. But it's more likely that people are just kind of going to take it, right? They might pretend to laugh or whatever, and so you want to be very, very careful that you are indeed doing it to build up. You're doing it to make people comfortable. You're doing it to encourage, and that you're very careful to not do it in such a way that essentially you're abusing your position as a leader. Because again, people are more likely just kind of laugh along with you since you're the boss, right? Now, and that's in the realm of giving or telling inappropriate jokes, right? Now, I tell dad jokes, I tell knock jokes all the time, and people laugh just because they're nice. That's a little different. But I think, as with anything else in a position of leadership, you need to be aware of the power discrepancy. And then it can make other people feel a little less inclined to be honest in their response to a joke or to humor. So you just need to be careful.
Got to read the room.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. I think the word is discernment, right?
Yes. It is something nice to have in leadership.
Yes. The Bible talks about wisdom and discernment, right? Wisdom comes from the Lord. This is why it's a good thing to read your Bible and pray a lot. Discernment, same thing. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is by Charles Spurgeon. He said, "Sometimes discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right." So again, before you say something funny at a table in a room, you probably should have a little bit of wisdom and discernment about, like you said, reading the room and knowing what would be appropriate and knowing what's not.
Yeah. I may have to steal that quote for my episode. That is discernment and wisdom.
You're welcome to do it. I doubt Spurgeon would mind.
I doubt he will too. So next question. Where do you see humor reflected in Jesus's teaching style, and what can leaders learn from that?
That's a hard question. I don't know that I'm not a comedian. This is one of the reasons that I was uncomfortable about this topic. I'm not a comedian, but I'm also not a theologian. I'm a musician and an administrator, for good or for bad. But if nothing else, I think that the very fact that I'm sitting here as a provost shows and proves that God does have a sense of mirth. But I always think about the Imago Dei, right? We are made in God's image. If we are made in God's image, and humor is such an important part of who we are and how we relate, then doesn't that mean that humor is part of who God is, and humor is part of how God would relate, right? That's to say, did humor exist before the fall? Right? Of course it did. Humor is not a sin. Now, I can sin with humor and with in telling inappropriate jokes, but sure, humor was around before the fall. So it's not a result of sin. It's a result of God. It's a result of His creation. That's part of who He is, and therefore that's a part of who we are.
Yeah, I agree. So I've been rambling about love leadership for the last couple of years, as you know. A leadership style that prioritizes relationship, restoration, and essentially meeting people where they are. Do you think that humor fits in well with that leadership style?
Yes. Yes. Uh, but be careful. I think, and this is a cliche, as a leader, you've got to be who you are, right? Um, let me put it this way. I don't use humor as a tactic. I don't use it as a strategy to win friends and influence people. I believe Dale Carnegie wrote a book about that, and a lot of people use it. And I can always tell when somebody's read that book because they're doing what he says, but they're not being genuine about it, right? And we can, in a lot of cases, see through that. Likewise, if I'm not naturally a funny person, then perhaps I should lean on some other gifts.
And you can tell when someone's not naturally funny.
That's right, especially whenever they respond or don't respond to a joke. So nice people are nice and are going to be nice leaders. Mean people are mean and they're going to be mean leaders. Funny people are funny and they're going to be funny leaders. That meaning they'll incorporate humor into their relationships. And then not funny people are not funny, and that's okay, right? Because if humor is not a gift for you, then something else is. Right. So whatever gifts God gave you, use those, right? And use them wisely, just like you would with humor.
So a leader that may have not been using humor, what practical guidelines would you offer to a leader who now wants to build a connection through humor without losing credibility with their team?
Google dad jokes and knock-knock jokes and start telling them endlessly to everybody you run into.
And the unpack.
It'll work out great.
Christmas.
Absolutely. Yes. You'll find total success in doing that. Seriously, again, if you're not funny and humor is not something that, if you're more interested in other things than humor, again, that's fine, right? So don't try to be something you're not. But so if you're naturally not a funny person, again, that's okay. And I'm not necessarily talking to you. I'm talking to the person who does appreciate humor, right? Who does enjoy joking around with their friends and their family. It's okay to do that at work, right? I've known people who are really funny outside of work. And they're just really natural and they get along well with others. But then when they come to work, they're almost like a totally different person, right? They're just frozen. They're stoic because they feel like that's perhaps an affectation that they're supposed to have in the workplace. And so they actually just kind of try to squelch whatever humor is bubbling up inside of them. I would say that it's okay to be funny, right? It's okay to figure out who you can pick on and who you can't, right? And be very, very careful. And it's you read the room, you pick up timing, right? Timing is everything too. Is one thing that we don't want as a boss, and this is something that I'm having to explain to my 13-year-old that as he's getting to that age, is that people don't always want to be around clowns, right? It's one thing to be funny, it's one thing to have a sense of humor, where given the opportunity, you might have something funny to say. But my 13-year-old leans a little bit right now towards, he's getting better, but he leans a little bit more towards he's always got to be funny. Everything has to be a joke. And so I make the point that this is not who people want to be around. They don't want to be around a clown. It might be fun to see a clown at the circus, or you might be scared to death of them, but you certainly don't want to live with one, and you certainly don't want to work with one.
Yeah, I agree. So last question. What's one sign that you've seen where humor has strengthened your team culture?
We get to know each other better. Like I referred to earlier, the guy that comes in and he's utterly stoic and frozen and completely different at work versus the way he is at home, at church, with friends. He's completely different. That it's okay to bring all of yourself into the workplace, right? Work is supposed to be hard. That's why it's called work. Work sometimes is stressful, and it's supposed to be because you have to get something done, right? But relationships at work don't have to be hard and stressful, right? Sometimes anxiety, work causes anxiety. Well, given some things that happen at work for people, sometimes it should cause anxiety because that's what prompts you to get things fixed. But you don't need to have anxiety in your relationships at work, right? Yeah. So that's the big difference, is that is something you're bringing part of yourself to work, which actually helps the workplace, right? And no matter what your job is, if you're flying airplanes, if you're working at a church or a school, if you're digging ditches together, no matter what it is that you're doing, at the end of the day, the work and the quality of the work and in the enjoyment of the work is totally dependent on the quality of the relationships, right? And so, if to the extent that we can be who we are in the workplace, just like we are at home, then we want to do that. And if humor is part of who you are, then go for it. Don't be afraid.
I have one more question. What's your favorite thing I have done to bring humor to your life?
Oh, the best? Where you managed to get yourself hit in the head 3 times in an hour by basketball? That was pretty funny, and I really appreciated your effort.
I definitely thought it was going to be the April Fool's joke where I slid the letter.
That was mean. That was meanness.
That was crossing the line.
That was meanness. Yeah, I should have qualified this earlier to say that any humor that leads the other person up to or actually to a heart attack, maybe not good. Maybe not good. Would you like to share with the crowd what your bit of humor was?
Oh, sure. So we'd gotten to this position. I think I'd been registrar, maybe a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And so opportunities were coming up, and every time I asked for a meeting, are you quitting? Are you quitting? And so I was tired of being asked, am I quitting?
And I was asking that jokingly, right?
Yes, sure.
There we go. Leading with humor.
And so I took that question, and it just happened to be April Fool's Day. So I wrote an April Fool's resignation letter, and it was well written up front. And then at the bottom, it put in that this was an April Fool's joke. I don't think he ever made it to the bottom before having the almost heart attack.
That's right. That's right. Before I even got halfway through the letter, I just balled it up, threw it away, and said, that's it. If she doesn't want to work with me anymore, then she's dead to me. And I'll walk over to HR and no, I'm kidding. No, I don't. How did I figure out? Do you remember how did I figure out that?
I think Miss Candy looked at it and went immediately to the bottom and seen that it was a joke.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was mean.
Yeah.
That was pure meanness.
Yeah.
Which, well, I tell you what.
My favorite April Fool's.
Respect though. That was good. The fact that I can laugh at it now.
Yes. And then I'm still here.
There's something. That's right. And me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on and joining me on Flip the Tables. This has been awesome. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I did want to close with one thing, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I was reading a book recently on economics. Just don't ask. All right. I got all into Adam Smith and all free market theory and all this stuff. So I've gotten really interested in that kind of thing. So I was studying and I saw that in the Caribbean, in some of the islands down there, the differences in rates in various things, right? So in Puerto Rico, for example, a slice of key lime pie is $2, right?
Mm-hmm.
But over in Jamaica, that same slice of key lime pie is $3, right?
Okay.
But then in the Bahamas, key lime pie, the same slice, 50 cents. I found that amazing. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah, those are the pirates of the Caribbean.
That is something.
That one's free.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Again, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode and the interview with Dr. John Reams, and it was insightful and a little humorous. If you're not already using humor in your leadership, maybe you should add it to your toolbox. At least test the waters a little bit. So I hope you join us back here next week for episode 5, where we dive into discussing trust and transparency and how that works with love leadership perfectly. We'll also be welcoming our second guest, Mr. Joel Bailey. I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. I hope you stick around after this closing, as I did add some bonus content from discussions that Dr. John Reams and I had. Join us back here next week. Same time, same platforms. This is Flip the Tables. I'm Bethany Brady, and we are leading differently. So you started out as a professor, then chair, then dean, and now you're provost. How has your humor adjusted as you've moved up leadership?
Oh, well, if it's adjusted, it's not changed purposely because of moving up in leadership, right? It's just I'm just continuing to be who I am, and I heard somebody once say that you can truly tell the character of a person by how they treat someone that can do nothing for them.
Yep.
In my case, and I guess it's just because I'm naturally a goofball, but in my case, whether I'm working with colleagues, whether I'm working with people that report to me or my boss, I always use humor. Just because it's part of who I am. I once had a boss who had this great idea that I had, and I said, "Hey, great minds think alike. And so do ours." I thought that was funny, but the guy just stared at me like he wanted to throw me out a window. So yeah, I mean, it's, I used to stock shelves at Walmart, back in my earlier days. You know how it is in school. You do whatever you do to get through it, right? So I used to work the 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at Walmart. And I'd work with guys and gals stocking shelves that were very different than I was in certain ways, obviously. But I still treated them exactly the same as I'll treat people here, right? The best thing I can give somebody in the workplace is the best thing that I can give somebody at home, which is myself. And humor, for good or for bad, is part of who I am. I do not consider, and this is, again, the reason I was a little bit anxious when you asked me to do this, or a little disappointed, when you asked me to talk on your leadership podcast about humor. I was a little disappointed because I don't consider that my greatest gift. But it's probably a good thing, right? Because if I did consider that humor was my greatest strength, then I would always be attempting to use it. Again, the Dale Carnegie idea. I was a total jerk, but then I read the book on how to win friends and influence people, and I learned how to be nice. No, all right, that's not how it is. And so, since I don't consider humor necessarily my greatest strength, then that means I'm not always thinking about how funny I am, right? Because have you ever met somebody that just thinks they're hilarious, and you really do try to laugh along a little bit, but you just can't take it. So I don't sit down and plan jokes for meetings. We've had bosses. I've had a boss or bosses in the past that they probably stay up all night just killing themselves trying to come up with the perfect joke to start off their meeting with, right? Or the perfect joke to start off a devotion with. So, I guess you can sit and you can plan humor in meetings, but I've got more important things to do when I'm planning for meetings. But just in day-to-day activity and day-to-day work, just watch for opportunities and take them. When you have an opportunity, like my uncle did at the table, when you have an opportunity perhaps to lower the stress level or to encourage somebody or just to promote joy and morale at the office, right? So it's not something that's planned as much, again, as it's just part of who you are. And and it's not something that I try to squelch. All right. Now, can I overdo it? Yes. Have I overdone it? Yes. I've gotten myself in trouble a lot with some of my attempts at humor. Not real trouble, but sometimes I might get a fist in my stomach from my wife. But a happy office is a productive office. Do you agree with that?
I do.
Yes.
Very
right.
much do.
An unhappy office is an unproductive office. I bet if we looked really hard, we'd find some sort of correlation there.
Yep.
Work can and often needs to be stressful, right? And I mentioned this earlier. It needs to be hard, but our relationships don't need to be. There does not need to be anxiety in our relationships, and I truly do think that humor, if that's part of who you are, can help. So don't be afraid to use that.
Yeah. That's my favorite thing is hearing the laughter from my team just in the back. It can be whatever game we've thrown up on the whiteboard to do for the day or just how their weekend was. But I remember Cooper specifically telling me the other day that they genuinely enjoy coming back to work on Monday. And I don't know if they'll ever realize how that makes me feel being their leader, but that means more than anything, is just hearing that one little sentence.
Yeah. And they're coming back. They love coming into work, into the office that you've created here, not because of the jokes you tell, right?
No.
But it's because of the overall atmosphere of the job, right? And I think that we may have a little bit of an advantage, if I may say so, as a Christian university, because I think at the end of all things, for Christians, for followers of Christ, that joy is central, right? And then any sort of unhappiness or melees or whatever, that's more peripheral for the Christian. Of course, we go through periods of sadness and even maybe depression, depending on what's going on in our lives. But as Christians who are filled with the Holy Spirit, and I heard somebody say this once, and I never forgot it, joy is central and sadness is peripheral. But for the non-Christian, it's joy that's peripheral, and it's the sadness or the emptiness that's central. And in a lot of cases, they try to cover that up with other things, including humor, right? You think about the whole cliche of the clown, right? It's Pagliacci, for heaven's sakes. The whole concept of you have a clown that disguises his sadness with constant humor and jokes and making people laugh. So when you combine humor and people being nice and thinking of others instead of themselves, here at a Christian university, then wow, that really allows for there to exist a workplace where people don't mind being there and people look forward to coming in. And again, a happy office is a productive office. So if your office, and this is for all of you leaders out there, if your office is not productive, take a look at how happy they are, right?
Yeah.
And if they're not happy, how much of that is on you?
Yep.
And what can you do to promote the opposite?
Yep. Doing a good leadership audit on oneself about once a year is pretty impactful on what you're doing and how you can improve or back off, because they may not need you as much, which is kind of hard, but it's like a proud parent letting them off.
Yes.
So it's exciting all the way around.
It is. And doing that successfully requires something that's even more difficult than humor. I'll give you a hint. It also starts with the letters HU and M. Wow.
Humility.
I wonder if there's overlap. Yeah. Humility. It takes humility to be willing to look at yourself, and then to adjust as necessary. I have known people, they have this wonderful gift, and I'm tempted to be jealous. They have this wonderful gift where no matter what room they walk into, they're the smartest person there. Wouldn't you love to be that person? No. And I'll tell you why. If you're the smartest person in every room you ever walk into, then guess what? You have nothing to learn. You have no growth. You're done.
Yep.
Right? But if you have the humility to walk into any room, recognizing that you have something to learn, or like you said, when you go home and perhaps do a little bit of a postmortem on your on how things are going at the office or projects that you've completed, if you have the humility to look at it realistically, and then to be willing to adjust accordingly, right? Mm-hmm. Then things can get done. We become, to use the literary term, we become three-dimensional characters where we do have the ability to change. And without humility, we're not going to change for the better, right? Without humility, we're going to change as we get older, but we're probably going to change for the worse.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so tell me your thoughts on sarcasm.
Ooh, okay. Sarcasm. Well, first of all, I want to point out two things. First, as I look at you holding the teeny tiny microphone, I see over your right shoulder a little piece of wood, and it says, "I'm sarcastic. What's your superpower?" And then I'll look over your left shoulder, and I see a sign that says, "Sarcasm is how I hug." Okay, so I presume that means I need to be very careful on the way I answer this question. I love it. How's that? Okay.
That's good.
No, seriously. Oh, sarcasm and cynicism are two things that can be very, very dangerous. Right now, cynicism is a way that you look at things, and a lot of times it manifests through sarcasm. One of the biggest problems with kids today, and remember earlier you pointed out how old I am, so I'm allowed to say those words. One of the problems with how I think that kids are today is that they view everything through the lens of sarcasm and cynicism. Everything is worthy of being made fun of. And I don't mean in a nice way. There's no sense of reverence anymore towards anything. And that's a danger. That's a danger. So just that doesn't specifically answer your question, but I think that's worth noting. Sarcasm itself is like any other tool, right? We've heard people make sarcastic comments that didn't offend anybody, but were funny. So sarcasm, like any other brand of humor, can be a very useful thing. And another thing, and this is how you are actually, is that one of the things that makes you a valuable colleague at work is that you're honest, right? If we don't know what you think of something, it's just because you've not had the time of day to tell us yet, right? And that's a good thing. And a lot of times you'll express your thoughts, your very, very honest thoughts, in a sarcastic way, but it's never done in a biting way. It's never mean, right? And so how is it that you've developed the skill to be sarcastic, Bethany? How have you developed the skill to be sarcastic without being mean? Well, I think I can answer that. You're not mean, right? Mean people will be mean. Nice people will be nice.
Yeah.
When mean people use sarcasm, it usually was going to be destructive and tears down. When nice people use sarcasm, it can actually be funny, and it can actually be a good tool for communication, frankly.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier before you came on that when I start a new friendship or I'm doing an interview with someone, I always bring up the fact that I'm a bit sarcastic. And if you can jive with it, great. If you can't, speak now or forever hold your peace, because I'll do my best to not be sarcastic. So
Yeah.
I try to meet people where they are.
Yeah. I think Jesus did that too, didn't he?
I think so.
It's probably a good thing.
Yeah. So when we first met was kind of a crazy time in both of our lives. I'd made a big decision to leave a job that I was beginning to be uncomfortable with. And I was terrified. Had a friend reach out and say there was a job opening back at Shorter when I had sworn off higher education, but I knew it had to be God. So I applied, just a smidge of experience, and I come to the interview. Nervous, anxiety, all of it. And I sit down, and the questions you asked me made me so comfortable that the interview was a breeze. Do you remember that day?
I do. Actually, I remember it very, very well. It was a very special day. I do remember it. It was actually the first time that I had tried pizza with white sauce rather than the red sauce. Somebody else at the table talked me into it. Yeah, so I do. That was a great day. I liked it. Mm-hmm.
I remember you asking me one question about the job.
Yeah, and you might want to explain what the job was. It wasn't window washer.
No. It was to be university registrar. And my answer was honest. I've never been a registrar before, but I've been in admissions. But I am a hard worker and a quick learner, and I believe in the mission. And then you said, so I hear you play college basketball. And I immediately thought, well, there goes that. But I was still comfortable the whole time. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I remember the questions because in an interview, you're getting to know a human being, right? You're getting to know a person,
Mm-hmm.
not a position. And you want a person in that position.
Yeah.
And the the conversation, yeah, I mean, I love basketball, so of course I was going to ask about that. So between that and the new type of pizza that I learned that I like, it was off to a good start. Sometimes humor is not necessarily telling a joke. In fact, a lot of times it probably shouldn't be. But sometimes humor is a state of mind, right? I mean, if you think about the use of that word through history, like in old books, you might read that he was a man of good humor, right? It doesn't mean that he told not jokes all the time. He was a man of good humor or a woman of good humor. And I think, at least for me, that it allows me to look at things a little differently than perhaps somebody else. So as a new provost looking to hire a new registrar, which as a new provost, when you lose your registrar, that's kind of like your airplane losing its right wing at 30,000 feet. It's not a good thing. It's not something you get to sit around and ponder. And so I needed somebody that was driven. I needed somebody that was confident in their ability to learn and get things done. And obviously, we needed somebody that was a mission fit. And one of the few skills I have, I don't have many, but one of the few skills I have is I can read people. And right away, as we started talking, and I think even before the pizza came, right away as we started talking, I kind of perceived you had these traits that would allow me to trust you in that position, right? And of course, that's the greatest thing is does this person engender trust, right? And by the way, one of the ways that people engender trust is by clearly being themselves.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, so since we're talking about humor, I probably told a joke at that lunch, and it probably landed with a thud. A certain percentage of mine do. But just the fact that I'm being myself, and what you see is what you get, right? I say what I mean and mean what I say. I want people around me to be like that too. And so with that interview, that's what it was being a person of good humor, perhaps, allowed me to not be so dogmatic as to think, well, she doesn't check this box, she doesn't check this box, she doesn't check this box, all right? But she is a person, I'm convinced, that could step into this position, or any position, as you've proven, step into this position and hit the ground running, get it done, put whatever work goes into learning what you need to know and then doing it. And you did. In fact, I mean, you did that, and you did it even better than I could have ever imagined. So that is my memory of that meeting and how this came to be.
Well, thanks. You remembered a little bit more than I did.